The wind howled like something dying. 11:47 on a Friday night in November, and downtown Boston had turned to ice and fury, the kind of blizzard that swallowed cars whole and left them abandoned on highways like shipwrecks. The foreclosure notice in Mia Hartley's pocket had been folded so many times the creases had split through the words. She didn't need to read it anymore. She had memorized every detail: $35,000 owed in 3 days, or the small house her mother had left her would belong to the bank. The sedan died 2 miles north on the empty stretch of Route 93. The engine had made a sound like something breaking, and then nothing. Just silence and the ticking of cooling metal and the soft breathing of her sleeping children in the back seat. Emma was 7 years old and curled against her brother Marcus, who was 5 and running a fever he didn't know about yet. Mia had counted her money 3 times before turning the key. $78. That was everything. $78 and 2 hours before the temperature would drop below zero and the wind would find the cracks in her old car's weather stripping. She had walked in her thin work uniform, the maroon polyester still stained with coffee from the double shift at the Grand View Hotel. The coat over it was threadbare at the elbows, purchased at a Salvation Army 7 years ago. Her lips had turned blue within the first mile. Her fingers had stopped sending signals to her brain by the time she saw the light. The underground poker room was carved into the basement of a nondescript building between an abandoned textile factory and a shuttered nightclub. The windows glowed warm gold against the black November night. Through the glass, she could see the outline of men in dark suits, the glow of cigarettes and cigars, the green felt of the tables, the stacks of money that represented more wealth than she would see in 30 lifetimes. She didn't think about what places like this meant. She thought about Emma and Marcus freezing in her car 2 miles away. She pushed through the heavy door. The sound of it closing behind her was like a gunshot in the silence. Every head turned. 12 men in expensive suits went absolutely motionless. The cigar smoke hung in the air like a physical thing, thick and choking, and underneath it she could smell money and leather and the particular scent of men who had never worried about paying rent. Alejandro Bianchi was sitting at the center table, his scarred hands moving with deliberate grace, stacking chips worth more than her annual salary. He was 38 years old, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar that ran from just below his left eye to his jawline, a pale line that had faded but never disappeared. His suit was charcoal gray and tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto him. The cufflinks at his wrists were white gold. On his left hand, a wedding band worn thin from 20 years of marriage. When he looked up, everything in the room seemed to hold its breath. She stood in the doorway with water dripping from her matted hair, with her lips blue and her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the crumpled bills and the foreclosure notice. She looked like a ghost that had wandered in from the winter, like someone who had already been dead for a long time and was only now realizing it. "My children," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper, fractured like thin ice breaking under weight. "My car is 2 miles north on Route 93. It died. They're sleeping in the back. It's 18 degrees and dropping. I have $78. She held up the money. It fluttered in her trembling hands like it might blow away on its own. "Please," she said. "I need someone who can drive me back. I can't, they're so cold." The foreclosure notice was clenched in her other fist. Even from 10 feet away, Alejandro could see the words printed at the top. 30 days to vacate. 30 days to gather 2 children and a lifetime of memories into bags and disappear. He set down his cards. The sound of them hitting the felt was the only noise in the room. "How old are your children?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, and he spoke slowly, each word deliberate and measured. 7 and 5, she said. "Emma is 7. Marcus is 5. Alejandro stood. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, and he moved with the kind of controlled grace that suggested he had spent most of his life learning how to break things and had decided instead to simply walk through the world like a man who had already broken everything he needed to break. He unbuttoned his suit jacket as he walked toward her. "Marco." "Sal," he said, and his 2 oldest men were already moving, already knowing without being told what he wanted. Marco was dark-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who had been beside Alindro since childhood. Sal was broader, older, grey threading through his beard. "You know where Route 93 goes dark at this hour? 2-mile marker north. Sedan, probably a 2009 Honda Accord. 2 children inside. Bring them here. Bring them to the penthouse. Bring them now." "Sir," Marco said, and it wasn't a question, just a statement of obedience. Within 30 seconds, they were gone. The door closed behind them and the sound of their footsteps on the concrete steps faded into the wind. Alindro looked at the woman in his doorway. Really looked at her. 32 years old, she would tell him later, but looking older. So much older. The kind of warmth that came from 8 years of what she still hadn't quite said, from counting money that wasn't enough and lying awake at night calculating which bills could wait and which bills would destroy her. Her eyes were pale blue and hollow, and they held the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. "Come," he said, and he extended his hand. "Your children will be here in 8 minutes. You're not standing in this room looking like that." She hesitated. It was a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but he saw it. She was afraid. Not of him. Of accepting help. Of hoping. Of the possibility that something in her life might change. She took his hand. His skin was warm and calloused, and it swallowed her small cold fingers like a prayer. He led her past the poker tables, past the men in suits who had suddenly become very interested in their cards, and toward the back of the room where a private elevator was set into the brick wall. The doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. "My name is Alindro Bianchi," he said as the elevator began to climb. "You're in a safe place now." She didn't believe him. Not yet. But she was too cold and too scared and too desperate to argue. What she did not know was that upstairs, on the 42nd floor of the building above the poker room, in a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor, 2 cribs sat side by side in a temperature-controlled nursery. Twin sons, born 6 months ago to Alindro's wife, Isabella. Both boys with a genetic condition called spastic cerebral palsy that the doctors said was permanent, untreatable, unchangeable. Both boys who would never walk without assistance. Both boys who had already broken their father's heart in ways he didn't know how to repair. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway lined with expensive art. Original paintings worth more than her house had ever been worth. Lighting so subtle and perfect that it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And at the end of the hallway, a living room that looked out over the entire city, the lights spreading below like fallen stars. "Sit," Alindro said, guiding her to a sofa that probably cost more than her annual salary. "You're in shock. Your core temperature is dangerously low. There's a bathroom through there. Warm water. As warm as you can stand." She moved like someone in a dream, each step deliberate and strange, as if her body was responding to commands her mind hadn't quite registered. In the bathroom, she peeled off the wet uniform and the thin coat and stood under a shower of water so hot it made her skin turn pink. For the first time in weeks, she stopped shaking. When she came back out, wrapped in a towel so soft she wanted to cry, Alindro was standing by the window with a glass of whiskey in one hand. He turned when he heard her, and something shifted behind his eyes. Something that looked almost like pain. "My wife is at our house upstate with the children," he said quietly. "She doesn't know you're here. She doesn't know what I'm about to do. So I will tell you plainly, your daughter and your son are going to arrive in 4 minutes. They're going to be cold and scared. And then they're going to be safe. And tomorrow, when the sun comes up, we're going to talk about what comes next. But tonight, we're just going to make sure nobody freezes to death." The elevator doors chimed. Marco appeared with Emma in his arms, her small face buried in his neck, and Sal carried Marcus, who was beginning to shiver with fever, his small body already fighting something neither of them could see. Both children were wrapped in thick blankets and wearing emergency blankets like silver cocoons, and their faces were pale and their eyes were wide with the particular terror that small children feel when everything is wrong and nothing makes sense. When Emma saw her mother, she cried out, a sound like a small animal calling to its herd, and Mia moved without thought, taking her daughter into her arms, holding her, feeling the cold radiating from her small body, feeling the way Emma's heart was racing too fast. "It's okay," Mia whispered. "It's okay, baby. We're safe. Mommy's here. We're safe." But she was crying as she said it, and her hands were shaking again, and somewhere deep inside her chest something broke open like a door that had been locked for so long she had forgotten it was there. Alejandro watched her hold her daughter. He watched the way she looked at her son, the way her entire body curved around them as if she could shield them from everything bad in the world with her own body. He watched the way love came off her like heat from a fire, pure and fierce and absolute. And in that moment, standing in his penthouse above the glittering city, he understood something that would change everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now let us go back to the beginning. Back to where Mia Hartley's life first began to unravel. Back to 8 years ago, when she walked through the doors of the Grandview Hotel for the first time, full of hope and armed with nothing but the belief that hard work would save her. 8 years earlier, the doors of the Grandview Hotel in downtown Boston slid open with a soft hiss, and Mia Hartley stepped through them like someone entering a cathedral. She was 24 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a braid so tight it pulled at her temples, and her green eyes held something that had not yet learned to break. Behind her, trailing on either side, were Emma and Marcus, her children, 6 and 7 years old, dressed in the best clothes she owned, which is to say clothes that were clean and only slightly worn at the cuffs. Her husband had died 2 years before in a construction accident, and in the months that followed, she had learned that a widow with 2 small mouths to feed was a person the world tried to forget. But walking through those doors, Mia believed. She believed that hard work could save them. She believed that if she was fast enough, smart enough, good enough, she could build something solid from the rubble of her grief. She carried a folder with her references, printed on paper she had paid for herself, and she held the children's hands so tight her knuckles had gone white. Douglas Hale emerged from his office like smoke, tall and thin, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He was 48 years old, with slick-back black hair starting to silver at the temples, and he wore a watch that cost more than Mia's monthly rent. His tie was silk. His shoes were Italian leather. And when he looked at her, something in his expression shifted into something that was not quite hunger, but something close. "Mia Hartley," he said, reading her application. "Widow. 2 children. Available immediately." "Yes, sir," she said. "I am a very hard worker. I learn quickly and I am reliable." "The position is housekeeping," he said. 50 hours a week. Minimum wage plus tips. You will clean guest rooms, change linens, collect towels. The job is demanding. There is no room for mistakes." "I understand," Mia said. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow." Douglas smiled then, and it was the smile of a man who had already decided something about her. "You can start Monday. Be here at 6 in the morning. Do not be late." She had wanted to cry with relief. For the first time in 2 years, relief had felt possible. Now, 8 years later, Mia's alarm went off at 5:15 in the morning, a grinding electronic sound that cut through the darkness of her tiny apartment like a knife. She silenced it before it could wake the children, though they would need to wake soon anyway. The bedroom was so cold her breath came out in small clouds, and she pulled the blanket tighter around herself before forcing her legs out from underneath it. The floor was ice beneath her feet. The apartment had 3 rooms and a kitchenette and cost $840 a month, which was $740 more than she could genuinely afford. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through them, and the radiator had not worked properly since the day she had moved in. In winter, she kept the oven on while the children slept, a practice that terrified her but less than the thought of Emma catching pneumonia. The furniture was second-hand, purchased from a thrift store 2 blocks away. The kitchen table had a leg that was slightly shorter than the others, so everything on top of it tilted slowly to one side, like a ship beginning to sink. She dressed in the dark, pulling on her housekeeping uniform, which was a brown dress that buttoned up the front and had been laundered so many times the fabric had gone thin and fragile. Over it, she pulled on a cardigan that had a hole in the elbow, which she had patched with a piece of felt that did not quite match. Her shoes were sturdy, but the sole on the left one was beginning to separate from the upper, and she used electrical tape to hold it together. She woke Emma first, brushing the hair back from her daughter's face. Emma opened her eyes and looked up at her mother with the particular sadness that had settled into her features over the past 8 years, a sadness that no child should ever know. "Do we have to go?" Emma asked. "Yes, baby," Mia said. "We have to go to school. Come on. Get dressed." While Emma dressed, Mia packed their lunches, which consisted of peanut butter sandwiches on bread so dry it crumbled as she cut it, an apple, and a single cookie that she had bought on sale 3 days ago when she had $12 extra. She packed Marcus's lunch into a backpack because they could not afford to buy him one, so she had borrowed Emma's, which meant Emma carried her lunch in a plastic bag. The backpack was small, made for a child half Marcus's size, and the straps dug into his shoulders as he walked. They left the apartment at 5:41 in the morning. The streets were still dark, and the cold was the kind of cold that felt like it was not just around them but inside them, in their bones, in their blood. Mia walked quickly, her hand on Emma's shoulder, Marcus trailing slightly behind. The school was not far, only about 1.5 miles away, but they had to walk because the bus fare was $3 for her and $2 for each child, and $5 was $5, which was the difference between heat and no heat, between meat and no meat. As they walked, Mia counted the hours of her day. She would walk the children to school, a 20-minute journey. She would work from 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. She would walk back to the school, a 20-minute journey. She would pick up the children. She would walk home, another 20 minutes. She would make dinner from the items in her refrigerator, which currently consisted of half a block of cheese, a carton of eggs, some rice, and 2 cans of beans. She would help the children with their homework. She would put them to bed. And then she would work from 6 in the evening until midnight as a waitress at Marty's Diner on the corner of 5th and Beacon, clearing tables and serving coffee, collecting tips that were almost never enough. The Grandview Hotel was a monument to wealth. 12 stories of glass and granite and polished marble, with a lobby that smelled like fresh flowers and expensive perfume, with black and white checkered floors that reflected the light from crystal chandeliers, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Mia had worked there long enough that she no longer noticed the beauty of it, but she felt the shame every single time she pushed through the service entrance in the back, as if the building itself knew that she did not belong inside it. She clocked in at 6:53 in the morning. She was early. She was always early. Early meant Douglas could not find a reason to take her tips. Early meant no mistakes. Early meant survival. The housekeeping cart was waiting for her on the 3rd floor, loaded with fresh linens, towels, cleaning supplies, and spray bottles. The 3rd floor held 42 guest rooms, and she would clean all of them by 2 in the afternoon. She would change beds, wipe down bathrooms, vacuum carpets, and empty trash cans. In summer, the work was manageable. In winter, her hands cracked and bled from the constant exposure to cold water and harsh chemicals. By 11 o'clock, she had cleaned 17 rooms. Her back ached. Her feet ached. Her hands were raw. She was moving through room 318 when she heard footsteps behind her, and she knew before she turned around that they belonged to Douglas Hale. "You are late," he said. His voice was smooth, almost conversational, but underneath it was a current of something else, something dark and knowing. "I am ahead of schedule, Mr. Hale," she said, not turning around. "I am on track to finish by 1 o'clock. You were not at your station at 7 o'clock sharp on Tuesday," he said. He had stepped into the bathroom where she was scrubbing the shower. The door closed behind him, and the sound of it closing was like the sound of a trap snapping shut. "You were 6 minutes late." "I apologize," Mia said. "The traffic was—" "I do not care about traffic," Douglas said. He stepped closer. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and choking. "Do you understand what we have discussed about punctuality?" She set down her brush. The bathroom was small, barely wide enough for 2 people. Her hands had started to shake. "Yes, Mr. Hale. Then you will understand that 6 minutes of my time is worth something. 6 minutes of your tips." He reached out and took her chin in his hand, his fingers cold and hard. "Do you understand?" She nodded, or tried to, but his grip was firm. "Yes." "Good girl," he said. He released her chin and stepped back, and she could see the outline of his satisfaction on his face, the particular pleasure that cruelty gave him. He left the bathroom without another word, and she stood there in the shower stall with her brush in her hand, breathing in short, quick gasps. That night, when she collected her tips, she had $127. Douglas took $90 for the 6 minutes she had been late on Tuesday, and the 3 minutes she had been unclear about the guest request in room 216 on Wednesday. He handed her $37 in cash, and his fingers brushed hers as he did, and she pulled her hand away as if she had been burned. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she said, because that was what he wanted to hear. That was what kept her employed. At the diner that night, she served coffee to men in suits and women in heels, and she smiled and she did not let her hand shake, and she collected tips from people who felt generous and no tips from people who did not. By midnight, she had collected another $42. 42 plus 37 was $79. She had $79 to last until Friday, and today was Monday. 3 blocks away, in an office that overlooked the city, Sophie Langford sat behind a desk of dark wood and watched the security footage from the 3rd floor. She was 52 years old and wore platinum blonde hair in a style that cost $200 every 6 weeks. Her diamonds caught the light like captured stars. She owned the Grand View Hotel. She owned 5 other hotels in Boston and 3 more in New York. She owned restaurants and office buildings and parking garages. And she had partnered with Douglas Hale 12 years ago because he was effective, because he understood that running a business meant squeezing every penny of profit from every possible place, including from the people who had no choice but to work for him. Sophie pressed a button on her desk, and Douglas appeared in her office within minutes, because that was how he showed his loyalty, by responding to summons like a trained dog. "The housekeeping girl on 3, Sophie said without preamble. "Is she stealing?" Douglas did not hesitate. "Almost certainly. She has been in the rooms with guest valuables. Jewelry has gone missing." Sophie leaned back in her chair. She knew that no jewelry had gone missing. She knew that Douglas was lying. And she knew that he was lying because he wanted her permission to do something worse, or because he was trying to hide something worse, and either way, she did not particularly care. What she cared about was that the girl had looked at her with something in her eyes when Sophie had passed through the lobby 3 days ago, something like a question, like she was wondering if there was anything better than this. "Fire her," Sophie said. "Do it tomorrow. Tell her why." Douglas smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had been given what he wanted. He turned to leave. "And Douglas," Sophie said, "make sure it is public. I want the other staff to understand what happens to people who steal from me." Wednesday morning, Mia arrived at the hotel at 6:43 in the morning to find Douglas waiting for her at the service entrance. His face was arranged in an expression of regret, which meant something terrible was about to happen. "Mia," he said, "we need to speak to Mrs. Langford. She has concerns about missing items from guest rooms." Her stomach dropped. It dropped like an elevator whose cable had been cut, falling and never reaching the bottom. She had taken nothing. She had never taken anything. But she understood in that moment that it did not matter whether she had taken anything, because they had already decided that she was guilty, and her only job now was to respond to a verdict that had already been rendered. Sophie's office was on the 12th floor. The elevator was so smooth and quiet that Mia could not feel it moving. They rose in silence. Douglas's cologne choked her. When the doors opened, there was Sophie, standing in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city as if she owned it, which, technically, she did. "Mrs. Hartley," Sophie said, not turning around. "I understand you have been stealing from our guests." "I have not," Mia said. Her voice was barely a whisper. I would never. I promise I have never taken anything. Sophie turned then. She looked at Mia with a kind of contempt that seemed to come from a very deep place, and when she spoke again, her words were clipped and careful. You will collect your final paycheck on Friday. You have until then to clean out your locker and vacate the building. If I hear that you have taken so much as a pencil from these premises, I will have the police called. But I didn't. Do not lie to me, Sophie said. It is unbecoming. You have until Friday. The world became very quiet then. Mia's ears were ringing. The windows were so clean and so large that she felt like she was standing in mid-air, about to fall. She walked home in the rain carrying the plastic bag with her work shoes and her spare uniform. It was Wednesday, and it was only Wednesday, and her shift had been at noon, and now she had no job. She had no other job until 6 o'clock, when she had to be at the diner. She had no tips from the hotel. She had $37 in her pocket. When she picked up the children from school, Emma asked if they could have heat, and Mia said the furnace was broken but the landlord was coming to fix it soon, which was a lie, because the landlord did not care about the furnace, and Mia had no money to fix it herself. She worked at the diner that night from 6 until midnight, and she collected $38 in tips. She had $38 plus $37 plus $4 from her couch cushions, which equaled $79. She had $79, and she had no job at the hotel, and the rent was due in 3 days. Thursday morning, a white envelope appeared in her mailbox. It was from the county. Inside was a notice. The foreclosure notice. They had 3 days to come up with $35,000 or they would lose the apartment. $35,000. She sat on the edge of her bed in the cold dark, holding that white envelope, and she counted and recounted her money and the calculations never changed. $79. No job. 3 days. $35,000. The snow began on Thursday afternoon. By Thursday night, it was a blizzard, falling so thick and fast that the world became nothing but white. Mia made dinner from eggs and rice. She put the children to bed at 7 o'clock because keeping them warm in bed was cheaper than keeping them warm anywhere else. She sat in the dark kitchen with the oven on, and she stared at the foreclosure notice, and she understood that there was no solution to this equation. There was no math that made survival possible. At midnight, she made a decision that would change everything. She could not solve this. But maybe someone else could. Maybe if she left, if she disappeared, the children could go to her sister in Connecticut, and at least they would have a roof over their heads. At least they would have heat. At least they would survive. She wrapped Emma and Marcus in every blanket she owned. She wrapped them in coats and scarves. She took her car keys, even though the car had not started reliably in 6 months, and she drove. The engine died halfway down Route 95, in a stretch of highway where there was nothing but empty dark and falling snow. The temperature inside the car began to drop immediately. She looked in the backseat at her children, sleeping beneath their blankets, and she knew that she had minutes, maybe 10 minutes, before the cold became dangerous. She took a breath. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the blizzard, knowing that she might not come back, knowing that this might be the moment when everything ended, knowing that she had no other choice. The snow was so thick she could barely see her own hand in front of her face. She walked forward into the white, and behind her, the car disappeared into the darkness. The snow fell so thick that the world turned white, erasing everything except the sound of wind cutting through the November darkness. Mia pushed her car forward on Route 95, the engine coughing, the heater dead, Emma and Marcus sleeping beneath blankets in the back seat. She had 13 minutes of warmth left. Maybe 10. The dashboard lights flickered red and amber, warning signals that meant nothing because she already knew the truth. The car was dying, and so was her last option. The engine seized. The car rolled to a stop in the center of the highway, a small metal box surrounded by nothing but snow and the approaching cold. She sat motionless for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then she opened the door and stepped into the blizzard, her breath crystallizing before her face, the wind moving like a blade wrapped in ice. She walked toward the highway's shoulder, her old coat offering no protection, her shoes soaked through, her mind cataloguing the minutes she had left before hypothermia became a real threat. She thought about her sister in Connecticut. She thought about Emma's 9th birthday coming in March. She thought about how surrender sometimes looked like sacrifice, and how she could not survive this, so maybe disappearing was the kindest thing she could do for the people she loved. Behind her, the car sat abandoned on the highway. Then, cutting through the white like a phantom, a convoy appeared. 3 black SUVs moved in formation, their headlights burning through the snow. They slowed. They stopped. The rear door of the center vehicle opened, and 2 men stepped out. Marco first, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. Then Sal, older, moving with the careful weight of someone trained in violence. They wore black suits that cost more than Mia's entire apartment, and beneath their jackets, weapons hung like promises of consequences. Mia backed away instinctively, her body reading danger in the way their eyes scanned her, assessing, calculating. The car, Marco said into a radio. Empty highway. Woman alone. Sal moved toward the abandoned sedan. His hand rested on the window. Through the glass, he saw them, 2 small children wrapped in blankets, sleeping soundly, unaware that their mother had just walked away from them into a blizzard with no intention of returning. Children, Sal said quietly. 2. Still breathing. Marco's expression shifted. Something hardened in his face. He pulled a phone from his jacket pocket and spoke 2 words, "We found them." The 3rd SUV's door opened. Alejandro Bianchi stepped out into the snow, and the world seemed to narrow around him. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall, his shoulders broad beneath a cashmere coat that cost more than Mia had earned in 4 years of double shifts. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and penetrating and entirely without mercy. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, a pale line that pulled slightly when he moved. He wore a gold watch on his wrist that caught the highway's minimal light, and his rings caught it too, silver, heavy, each one a statement of power. He looked at Mia. She stood perhaps 30 feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her body shaking from cold or fear or both. She had never seen this man before. She had no way of knowing who he was. But something in the way Marco and Sal moved, the way they deferred, the way they waited, told her that this was the person they answered to. "Get her inside," Alejandro said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. They moved toward Mia, and she should have run. She should have screamed. But her body would not obey her mind anymore. Cold had locked her muscles. Fear had paralyzed her. She let Marco wrap her in a blanket that smelled like expensive cologne and cigarette smoke. She let them place her in the heated interior of the SUV. Through the rear window, she watched Sal reach into her car and gently lift Emma into his arms, then Marcus. 2 children, ages 7 and 5, wrapped in blankets, placed carefully in the vehicle beside her. Emma stirred, her eyes opening just enough to register warmth and safety, then closing again. Alejandro sat across from her, studying her with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people like maps. "Your car," he said. "How long has it been dead?" "Since this morning," Mia whispered. Her voice came out broken. "I had no choice. I had to." "You have choices now," he said. "Where are you going?" She did not answer. She could not answer. To tell him the truth would be to admit that she was running away from her children, that she had planned to abandon them, that she was already so far gone that even desperation looked like escape. "I am Alejandro Bianchi," he said. "Those are my men. You are safe." The convoy moved through the snow, climbing into Boston from the south, the city lights appearing like candles in darkness. They pulled into an underground garage beneath a downtown building that looked like every other high-rise, except for the armed guard who nodded at the vehicles without checking identification. The elevator climbed. 40 floors. 50. Mia held Emma against her chest, and Marco cradled Marcus, and no one spoke. The penthouse doors opened onto a space that Mia's mind could barely process. Marble floors stretched in every direction, so polished they reflected the city lights like water. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Boston Harbor churning in the storm, snow battering the glass, the entire city spread below them like a kingdom. Original paintings hung on the walls. A grand piano occupied one corner. The space was beautiful and cold and absolutely without softness. A nurse stood up from a chair in an adjacent room. Her uniform was white. Her eyes were exhausted. Behind her, separated by a half-wall, Mia could hear the sound of crying, not the ordinary crying of hungry or tired children, but something sharper, more desperate, more broken. "The boys," Alejandro said. He did not move toward them. He stood at the window, his back to everyone. "Born 6 months ago. The doctors in Boston told me they would never walk. Never speak. Severe cerebral palsy. Developmental delays so profound that the specialists recommend institutionalization." He paused. His jaw tightened. "I have hired the best neurologists in the country. I have spent $2 million on treatment. Nothing works." Emma climbed down from Mia's arms and wandered toward the doorway of the nursery, drawn by the sound of the crying. Mia followed instinctively, and neither Alejandro nor his men stopped her. The room was spotless, clinical, a space designed by someone who had read every book about disability care and understood nothing about what children needed. 2 cribs sat beneath medical equipment, monitors beeping, for stands, tubes running to tiny limbs twisted inward by muscle contracture. The babies looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, impossibly angry at a world that had betrayed their bodies before they were even born. One of them had Alejandro's eyes. Mia approached the cribs without permission. The nurse tensed. Marco, who had followed her inside, took a subtle step forward. But Mia was already singing a wordless hum, something her own mother had taught her before death took her at 42. The crying stopped. The silence was sudden and complete. "My husband was a physical therapist," Mia said. She did not look at Alejandro. She reached into the crib and began to move the nearest baby's legs in slow, careful circles, not aggressive, not forced, just gentle motion that invited the body to remember its own possibility. Before he died, he worked with children like these. "He taught me things the medical system does not always use because they take too much time. Too much patience. Too much human touch." Alejandro stepped into the room. His men did not follow. His face was unreadable. "You think you can help them?" he asked. "I do not know," Mia said. She turned to face him, and in that moment, something shifted in the space between them. She was nobody to him, a stranger he had pulled from a blizzard, a woman with scarred hands and worn clothes and a broken life. But her eyes held something he recognized, something he had thought died in his own chest years ago when his wife suffered a miscarriage so severe she could never carry children again. Hope. Or at least, the willingness to try in the face of impossible odds. "But I can try," Mia said. 3 days passed. The snow stopped falling. The world outside the penthouse windows froze solid, Boston transformed into a city of ice and salt and brown slush. Mia worked in the nursery for 8 hours each day, moving the twins' limbs through therapeutic motions, singing to them, talking to them, refusing to accept that their bodies were finished deciding what they could become. Alejandro watched from the doorway for hours at a time. He said nothing. Marco had noticed. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Marco mentioned it to Sal, and Sal replied only that in 15 years he had never seen his boss stand still for anything that did not involve weapons or money. "Why are you doing this?" Alejandro asked on the evening of the 4th day. Mia sat on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by soft mats and exercise equipment. Her hands were red from the work, her back aching. She did not look up when he spoke. "Because they deserve a chance," she said. "Because I know what it feels like to be helpless. Because someone has to believe that they can become more than what the world told them they are." He moved closer. "Your foreclosure notice." The one you dropped in my car. $35,000. Due in how many days? Her shoulders went rigid. 3 days. But it does not matter. There is no way to. Consider it handled, Alindro said. I have made a wire transfer. The property is protected. Mia stood, backing away, shaking her head. No. I cannot take your money. Why would you help me? I am nobody. You do not owe me anything. He crossed the room in 2 strides. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute conviction. You are not nobody. You are the first person in 6 months who looked at my sons and saw hope instead of tragedy. You are the first person who touched them without fear. You are not nobody to me. Marco and Sal heard him say it from the hallway. Both men froze. Neither had ever heard Alindro Bianchi speak to anyone like that, with something that sounded almost like tenderness. That night, Alindro brought her to the kitchen and placed food in front of her. Real food. Pasta made by a chef. Fresh bread. Vegetables. Meat. He watched her eat, and he asked the question she had been dreading since the moment they met. Tell me about the scars on your back. Her hands froze. She set down her fork. I do not talk about it. You are safe here, Alindro said. Tell me. And she broke. 8 years with Douglas Hale. 8 years of verbal abuse that escalated to physical. 8 years of being cornered in storage rooms, pushed against walls, threatened. The night he took a metal serving tray and struck her back 4 times, the impact so violent she thought her ribs had broken. The scars that remained, raised, purple, permanent. Sophie Langford's threat, tell anyone and your children will be taken from you. Alindro listened without moving. His face became something carved from stone. His name is Douglas Hale, Mia whispered. And Sophie Langford owns the hotel. They are partners. Alindro stood and walked to the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. They will never touch you again. The door to the penthouse opened on the afternoon of the 6th day. Douglas Hale stood in the entrance, his face red with rage. He had followed Mia from downtown, had traced her to this address through sources Mia did not know existed. Behind him, security had simply stepped aside and let him through, men who worked for Alindro, men who had been waiting for this moment. You think you can just quit? Douglas screamed. His voice echoed through the marble space. You owe me for training, for uniforms, for the opportunity one gave you. The penthouse door opened fully. Alindro stepped into view. He was 6 feet 3 inches of controlled violence, his face utterly cold, his eyes like winter. Marco and Sal stood behind him, and Douglas Hale's voice died in his throat. Who are you? Douglas managed. The man who is going to make sure you never hurt another woman, Alindro said. He took 1 step forward. Douglas stumbled backward, his anger replaced by something that looked almost like understanding. The understanding that he had just walked into a situation from which he could not talk his way out. Leave, Alindro said. Now. Or I will make you leave in a way that will require your family to identify you by dental records. Douglas left. Sophie Langford arrived the next morning in a limousine that pulled to the curb outside the building's main entrance. She wore a coat made from fur that cost more than 3 years of Mia's old salary. Diamonds hung at her throat. Her smile was the smile of someone who had never met a consequence. She found Mia in the lobby. The elevator doors were closing, but Sophie's hand stopped them. You think you can hide behind some criminal? Sophie's voice was ice-coated in sweetness. I own this city, Mia. I own judges. I own police. I will destroy you in court. I will take your children. I will make sure you never work again. You will spend the rest of your life understanding what it means to have crossed me. Mia's voice shook, but she stood tall. For the first time in 8 years, she did not look at the floor. I am not afraid of you anymore. Sophie's smile widened. You will be. But Sophie did not know that Alejandro Bianchi had made a single phone call to an old friend in the FBI, and that the investigation into her money laundering operations and Douglas Hale's pattern of assault across 12 former employees had just been fast-tracked to federal priority. On the 10th day, one of the twins gripped Mia's finger and held on. His hand, twisted by muscular dystrophy just days before, had moved with intention. Purpose. Volition. The nurses gasped. The doctors came running. The scan showed activity in his motor cortex that the specialists said was impossible. This is medically inexplicable, the lead neurologist said. He was a man in his 60s, respected, published, certain. His prognosis has not changed. This is temporary. It will regress. But it did not regress. Alejandro stood in the nursery doorway that night, watching Mia work with both boys now, their tiny limbs moving more freely, their eyes tracking her face, their bodies awakening to possibility. His shoulders were rigid. His hands were clenched. Something was breaking open in his chest, something he thought had died when his wife lost the babies, when the doctors said they could not have biological children, when he accepted that his bloodline would end with him. "Come to the balcony," he said to Mia. It was late. Past midnight. The city spread below them was illuminated, the snow having stopped, the sky clearing in patches where the moon could burn through. They stood at the glass railing, the wind carrying the smell of the harbor, salt, cold, the vast indifference of the Atlantic. "Why do you do this?" Alejandro asked. "The therapy exhausts you. I can hire nurses. Specialists. People trained for this. Because I know what it is like to be broken and have no one believe you can heal," Mia said. She looked at the city, not at him. "Because your sons deserve someone who will not give up on them. Because you gave me hope when I had none, and I want to give that to them." He reached out. His hand found hers, scarred and calloused and stronger than it looked. "You gave me something too," Alejandro said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The moment stretched between them like a bridge spanning an impossible distance. But in a hotel downtown, Sophie Langford was making phone calls. And Douglas Hale was planning a final strike designed to destroy Mia completely, to prove that nobody could hide from consequence, that mercy was a weakness that would be punished. What neither of them understood was that they had already been marked for destruction, that federal agents were moving into position, that the morning would bring a dawn raid that would end not with mercy, but with something far more terrible, the systematic disassembly of everything they had built. The penthouse was silent except for the sound of the harbor wind moving against the glass. Inside that silence, Alejandro and Mia stood together, neither knowing that their story was about to enter its final act, the moment when the darkness they had both survived would finally recede, and light would break through. The office on the 42nd floor of the Grand View Hotel was all glass and leather and the kind of silence that money buys. Sophie Langford sat behind a desk made of mahogany that had cost more than a year of Mia's rent, her fingers drumming once, twice, 3 times against the polished surface. Her eyes were ice blue and empty of everything except calculation. Across from her, Douglas Hale shifted in his chair. He was sweating. Actual sweat, beading at his temples, soaking through the collar of a shirt that had never been cheap enough to absorb liquid like that. "She is living with Bianchi," Douglas said. His voice cracked on the name like he was 17 years old and afraid of the dark. "We cannot touch her. Not now. Not there." Sophie's smile spread like a blade across her face. "Watch me." She reached for her phone without breaking eye contact. Dialed 4 numbers. When the voice on the other end answered, her tone changed completely, professional, concerned, the voice of a woman reporting a genuine crisis. "Yes, hello. I am calling to report a child welfare concern. There are 2 minors residing at the Bianchi penthouse on Beacon Hill. 2847, Beacon Street, Unit 47A. The caregiver is a known associate of organized crime." "Yes. Yes, I will hold." She waited. 30 seconds. 45. The rain outside drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows like fingers demanding entry. "This is the Boston Department of Children and Family Services." How can I help? The voice was female, bored, institutional. Sophie had prepared for this. She had documents, forged ones that looked more real than truth. She had statements from people who did not exist, medical reports fabricated by a doctor she paid, photographs altered so subtly that no casual eye would catch the manipulation. She was offering a gift to a system that was already exhausted, already believing the worst about people, already primed to act on the slightest suggestion of danger. The children, Sophie said softly, are in immediate danger. 3 hours later, at 9:13 in the morning, the knock came to the penthouse door. Mia was in the living room with Emma and David. Emma was 4 years old with dark curls and her mother's exhausted eyes. David was 5, smaller than he should be, his body still showing the scars of a disease that had nearly taken him twice. They were building a tower out of wooden blocks, something the occupational therapist had recommended, when the sound came. Not a doorbell. A knock. Hard. Official. The kind of knock that carries the weight of institutions behind it. Mia's stomach went into free fall. A woman in a grey blazer stood in the hallway with a clipboard and a face that had learned not to feel. Beside her was a man with a badge. Behind them, the hallway seemed to stretch into something darker than it had been a moment before. Mia Hartley, the woman asked. Yes. I am Sarah Chen, Department of Children and Family Services. We have received a report that these children may be in an unsafe environment. We need to conduct an immediate home assessment. The words hit like a physical blow. Mia's hand found Emma's shoulder. There has been a mistake. These children are safe. They are. We will be the judges of that. Please step aside. They moved into the penthouse like it belonged to them. Their eyes catalogued everything, the expensive furniture, the view, the kind of luxury that made people suspicious. Mia's hands were shaking. She could not make them stop shaking. Emma grabbed her leg. Mommy, what is happening? It is okay, baby. Everything is. We need to speak to the children separately, Sarah Chen said. She was already reaching for Emma's hand. Emma screamed. It was not a regular scream. It was a scream that came from somewhere deep and primitive, a scream that meant terror, that meant the world was ending. David started crying. Not regular crying either. His body went rigid and his breath came in panicked gasps, a sensory meltdown, exactly what he had suffered before the therapy, before the progress, before Mia had taught him that safety existed. Stop, Mia said. She heard her own voice crack. Please stop. You are hurting them. We need to conduct. You need to get out. The voice came from behind them, low and controlled and carrying the kind of authority that makes people move without thinking. Alindro stood in the doorway to his study, still in his pajamas and robe, his scar visible in the morning light like a map of violence. Behind him, Marco appeared, then Sal. Their hands were not on weapons, but everyone in the room understood that weapons existed in the spaces between seconds. Sarah Chen straightened. She was trained for resistance. Mr. Bianchi, I understand this is difficult, but... No, Alindro said. You do not understand. You understand nothing. But what you will understand in the next 60 seconds is that you are going to leave this apartment, you are going to return to your office, and you are going to tell whoever sent you that if they ever come here again, they will discover that corruption has a price. A very specific price. Do you understand me? Sarah Chen's face went pale. She had not been prepared for this. Caseworkers deal with poor people, broken people, people who have no power to push back. She had not been trained for men like this. I have legal authority. You have nothing, he said. You have a badge that means something only in rooms where people are afraid. You are no longer in those rooms. Leave. Now. She left. The man with the badge left. The door closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid. Emma was still screaming. David was on the floor rocking, his breathing shallow and panicked. Mia knelt beside them, gathering them against her chest, feeling their small bodies shake with terror. Alejandro did not move toward her. Instead, he walked to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water. He sat on the floor beside them, far enough away that his presence would not trigger more fear, close enough that they could see he was there. His men withdrew. The apartment became quiet except for the sound of children's breathing slowly returning to normal. "They are safe," he said, not to Mia, but to the children. "No one is taking you anywhere. I promise you this." It took 40 minutes for Emma to stop crying. It took an hour for David to stop shaking. Mia sat between them, her hands moving in small circles on their backs, her mind fracturing into pieces. At 2:17 in the morning, the rain hammering against the penthouse windows like it was trying to break through, Mia sat on the bathroom floor with a pen and a sheet of paper taken from Alejandro's desk. Her hands were shaking so badly that her writing looked like a child's. She wrote, "You gave me everything I thought I could never have: safety, hope, a reason to believe the world is not only cruel. But I cannot let you lose everything because of me. Sophie will destroy you through me. Douglas will use my children as weapons. I am leaving before dawn. I am taking Emma and David and disappearing. I have family in Vermont. We can hide there. It is better this way. Thank you for showing me that good men exist. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. I will never forget you. I will never stop believing in miracles because of what you did. But I have to go. I am sorry." She folded the letter and left it on his desk. She packed one small bag, clothes for the children, a stuffed animal Emma could not sleep without, the crumpled foreclosure notice that somehow still felt important. At 4:53 in the morning, she walked toward the door with Emma sleeping on one shoulder and David holding her other hand. But at 5:13 in the morning, Alejandro woke and found the letter. His entire world stopped. His hands that had ordered men to disappear, hands that had signed contracts worth millions, hands that had learned to be gentle only because of her, crumpled the paper. He read it once. Twice. The third time his eyes did not focus on words anymore. He was moving before his mind caught up. Down the elevator. Into the black sedan. Marco and Sal already in the car, because his men had learned to read the signs of crisis the way sailors read storms. "The bus station," Alejandro said. "Now." They found her at the Greyhound station at 5:53 in the morning. The station smelled like diesel and desperation and the particular sadness of people leaving their lives behind. Mia was holding 2 tickets in her hand, Emma asleep against her shoulder, David clutching a small toy car. She looked up and saw him coming through the doors. Their eyes met and everything stopped. Alejandro's face was not angry. It was broken. It was the face of a man who had just realized that the one thing that mattered had almost slipped through his fingers. He walked toward her like he was moving through water, and when he reached her, he did not yell. He barely spoke above a whisper. "You were going to leave," he said. "I have to. They will destroy you. The charges they will manufacture, the evidence they will plant. Let them try." He reached into his jacket. Not for a weapon. For his phone. He made one call. One. He spoke 4 words. "It is done." At exactly 6:06 in the morning, 18 blocks away, federal agents were moving into position outside the Grand View Hotel. 40 men in tactical gear, with warrants signed by judges, with evidence compiled by the FBI for 9 months. Parallel to that, another team was surrounding Sophie Langford's estate in Newton, a $15 million mansion built on money that had never been reported. The battering rams hit the doors simultaneously. Douglas Hale was dragged from his apartment in downtown Boston while he was still in his underwear, screaming, his neighbors watching from their doorways. The handcuffs bit into his wrists. His face was against the wall of the hallway he had walked down 1,000 times, and suddenly it was a different hallway, a hallway where his crimes had weight and consequence. 8 counts of sexual assault, the FBI agent said, reading from the warrant with the tone of someone reading grocery lists. Wage theft exceeding $200,000. Extortion. Witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent. Douglas Hale collapsed. Actually collapsed, his legs giving out, his body hitting the floor. He was trembling like a cornered animal, like something small and desperate that had nowhere left to run. "I did not do anything," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "This is a mistake. I will pay them back. I will." "Too late," the agent said. Sophie Langford was arrested on her front lawn in her silk robe, the morning sun catching her face as cameras flashed. 14 news vans had already arrived. Someone had tipped them off. The whole city watched as she was led away, screaming, her face contorting with a rage so pure it looked like madness. "Do you know who I am? I own half this city. This is a mistake. This is money laundering," the agent said. She was younger than Sophie, and her voice was steady as stone. "Tax evasion. Conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying social services reports, conspiracy to file false criminal charges. 40 years federal prison. Minimum. Possibly more depending on what else we find." Sophie's screaming stopped. Her mouth opened and closed. No words came. There was nothing left to say. The perp walks were broadcast on every news channel by 7:11 in the morning. Mia watched from the bus station, Alindro's arm around her shoulders, his chin resting against the top of her head. The foreclosure notice, that crumpled piece of paper that had haunted her for 2 years, she took out of her pocket and held it up to his face. "Burn it," she said. He took out his lighter. A small silver thing that cost more than she had earned in a month. He ignited the paper and let it fall into a trash bin, where it became ash and smoke and nothing. Just nothing. Justice was not death. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. This was systematic destruction. Careers ended in 72 hours. Reputations erased from existence. Federal prison sentences that meant the rest of their lives would be spent in cells. Sophie Langford's empire collapsed like a house made of paper. Douglas Hale's face appeared in every newspaper, his crimes listed in detail that made people turn away from their breakfast. Mia Hartley finally breathed free. 3 months after the federal agents took Sophie Langford and Douglas Hale away in handcuffs, Mia Hartley stood in the nursery of Alindro's penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, and something miraculous was happening. The morning light streamed through windows so tall they seemed to drink in the entire sky. Golden. Warm. The kind of light that had never touched her skin during those 8 years at the diner, counting tips under fluorescent buzzing that made her temples throb. The twins lay on a soft blue mat, their bodies no longer rigid with the tension that had defined them since birth. 9 months old now. Still small, still fragile, but changing in ways that made Mia's breath catch in her throat every single day. The left twin, she called him Leo, reached toward a toy shaped like a bright red star. His arm extended, trembling slightly, fingers uncurling. 3 months ago his hands had been clenched fists, locked tight like he was holding onto something invisible and painful. Now his fingers opened. The muscles in his forearm tensed. His small hand grasped the star. He held it. Mia felt her chest crack open like that. Wide. Breaking. Beautiful. The right twin, Marco Jr., named after the lieutenant who had become something like family, turned his head toward her voice. His dark eyes found hers. He smiled. His whole face transformed when he smiled, his cheeks rounding, his eyes crinkling at the corners like he was laughing at some secret joke only babies understand. That smile. It was a miracle. 3 months ago they told her the neurological damage was too severe. That these children would spend their lives in wheelchairs, that their cognitive development would be severely limited, that she should prepare herself for a life of limitation. The specialists had used words like permanent and irreversible and untreatable. Words that sounded like prison sentences. The door opened quietly. Dr. Elizabeth Chen stepped through, her tablet clutched against her chest. She was the neurologist Alindro had flown in from Johns Hopkins, the one who had examined the twins on that first day when Mia brought them home from the hospital. the one whose face had gone pale when she reviewed their birth scans. Dr. Chen's eyes went wide. The tablet slipped slightly in her hands. "I need to examine them," she said quietly. It wasn't a request. 30 minutes later, Dr. Chen sat on the edge of the white sofa in the living room, staring at her notes. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked up at Mia, who sat across from her with Emma between her knees, Emma's small fingers braiding Mia's hair with the focus of someone performing open-heart surgery. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Chen said. Not unkindly. Just stated as fact, like announcing weather. 3 months ago these children had almost no voluntary motor control. Their muscle tone was severely compromised. Their neurological responses were minimal. And now, she shook her head slowly. Now they are hitting developmental milestones weeks ahead of schedule. Leo's grip strength is normal. Marco's visual tracking is perfect. Both of them show signs of cognitive awareness that should not be possible given their initial presentation. Mia's fingers stilled in Emma's hair. "What did you do?" Dr. Chen asked. "What treatment protocol did you follow? What therapy? What medications? Because I need to document this. I need to publish this. This is extraordinary." Mia was quiet for a long moment. Emma whispered, "Mommy does the love thing. She sits with them every morning when the sun comes up. She tells them stories. She cries happy tears when they smile." Dr. Chen looked at Emma, then back at Mia. Mia smiled softly. "I just loved them. And never gave up." "It is more than that," Dr. Chen said. She put her tablet down. When she looked at Mia, her professional composure had cracked slightly, revealing something raw underneath. "You did what 100 specialists could not." The door to the apartment opened. Alejandro stood in the threshold, still wearing his charcoal suit from his morning meeting. He had stopped going to the underground poker rooms. He had stopped most things that required darkness. Instead, he ran legitimate businesses now, restaurants, hotels, real estate. Marco handled the transition with quiet efficiency. Sal managed the people who needed managing. And Alejandro came home at night. He came home to them. His eyes found the twins first, then Emma, then Mia. He watched her from the doorway, his expression unreadable except for the slight softness in his jaw, the way his shoulders released tension they had been carrying for years. "The doctor came by," Mia said. Alejandro nodded slightly to Dr. Chen, who gathered her tablet and excused herself with the professionalism of someone who recognized a moment that needed privacy. That night, after Emma was asleep in her room and the twins had been fed and changed and settled into their cribs with soft breathing, Alejandro found Mia on the balcony. The city lights of Boston spread beneath them like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. The harbor was dark and still. A single ship moved slowly through the water, its lights reflecting in long golden lines. He stood beside her without speaking. They had learned to be comfortable in silence. His hand found the small of her back. "You saved them," he said finally. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something carved into stone that would not change. "They saved me," Mia said. "You saved me." He took her scarred hand in his. The scars were still visible, thin lines that mapped the geography of what she had survived. But they had stopped being ugly to her. They looked like strength now. Like proof that she had survived. "I grew up in poverty," Alejandro said. His accent thickened slightly when he spoke about his past, syllables curling into each other. "My father was violent. Beat my mother. Beat me. I clawed my way out of that life and swore no child would ever suffer the way I suffered. That no one I loved would know that kind of pain." He turned toward her. The scar along his jaw caught the light from the city below. "When my sons were born disabled, I thought I had failed. That somehow I had passed the darkness down to them. That despite everything I had built, everything I had fought for, I could not protect them from suffering. You showed me I was wrong. You showed me that healing is not about money or power. It is about refusing to give up on the people you love. It is about sitting with them in the dark and telling them stories until they believe they belong in the light. Mia felt tears run down her face. Not the tears of breaking. The other kind. The kind that meant something inside her was being repaired. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now we build something better," he said. "For them. For Emma. For you and me." He kissed her slow and gentle, and somewhere below them in the city a siren wailed and faded, and Mia Hartley believed for the first time in 8 years that she deserved something good. That she had not survived all of this only to return to breaking. Inside the apartment, in the darkness of the nursery, the twins slept peacefully. Emma was curled up in her small bed reading the same book she had read to them 100 times, the words a lullaby she had taught herself. Marco and Sal stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, trying to look tough, but both of them were smiling as they watched the scene unfold on the balcony through the glass. They had never seen Alejandro like this. Gentle. Home. Here. 6 months later, 1 year and 3 months after the twins were born, the neurologist returned for a final evaluation. The boys were walking now. Holding onto furniture, taking small unsteady steps across the living room, laughing when they stumbled. Their laughter sounded like bells. Pure and bright and impossible. Dr. Chen watched them navigate the room and she shook her head slowly. "This is a medical miracle," she said. She was crying slightly, though she tried to hide it. "They will need ongoing therapy, but they will walk. They will talk. They will have full and normal lives. You did the impossible." Mia held one twin while Alejandro held the other. Emma sat between them reading a story to both boys, her small voice steady and sure. The penthouse around them glowed with warmth. The furniture was expensive, yes, but there were toys scattered on the floor. There were drawings taped to walls. There were photographs, Mia holding the twins, Emma braiding their hair, Alejandro on his knees playing with them on the soft blue mat. This was what it looked like when someone refused to break. When someone held on. When someone believed that impossible was just another word for not yet. I spent 8 years believing I deserved the pain, Mia thought. That I was too broken to be saved. That love like his was a fantasy for people who had never known Douglas Hale's hands or Sophie Langford's cruelty. I was wrong about all of it. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you least expect. And sometimes the miracle you need comes from refusing to give up on love. The twins are walking now. Emma has a mother. Alejandro has a family. And I? She looked at her scarred hands holding her son. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances and impossible miracles. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow's story will blow your mind. Comment below, have you ever witnessed something everyone said was impossible? I read every single comment. See you tomorrow.